Um, Mark Miller is going to be our presenter. Mark is one of the founding partners of Imagine IT, and he's been in the tech space for 25 years. He has served on advisory boards for Intel and Microsoft. But the most important thing, what you need to know about Mark Miller is he has a tremendous heart for the mid-sized business arena and a heart for educating others so they can become successful. So I'd like to go ahead at this time and turn it over to Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Appreciate everybody joining us here today for this Microsoft 365 little seminar. As Mary said, we're not going to get too much into the weeds with real technical SharePoint or Teams or Power BI types of stuff, although we have some guys on the line here today from Perceptive who are some of the most highly skilled engineers that we've met, who will answer any of those technical questions later after the seminar is over. You know, the Microsoft 365 environment is crazy. There's a gentleman that put together this periodic table that shows some of the applications that are available in the 365 environment. And it's crazy. I'm sure that all of you have clicked on the little waffle on the left-hand side when you're in the 365 environment, and you pull up this litany of 50 or 60 different applications that are available natively in the application, and you start looking through some of these things, and you're like, you know, what are these things, right? I mean, what are Power Apps, and what is Stream, and you know, and what are all these different things? If you click on the add-ins, which is kind of to the top right there of the screen, you'll actually see additional hundreds, even thousands of different third-party applications that are available to the 365 environment. The point is that the people at Microsoft they're not dumb. They're really smart people, and they've developed all of these applications for a reason. Each one of these applications have productivity and efficiency, downstream impacts that they could positively affect your business. It's just how do you get to a point where you can understand and figure out which of these applications can really drive your business sort of to that next level. So a little bit about Imagine IT. We are a managed service provider here in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. We have around 210 clients or so with their offices sort of headquartered here in the Midwest, and we support offices in, I think, 43 states and a couple of different countries. So with the remote capabilities that everybody has and things like Office 365 and the ability to have your data and your infrastructure in the cloud, we can really support customers from everywhere. We as a company are really generalists, and we don't specifically focus on development work, and so we've partnered with a really great company called Perceptive Software Solutions, and you'll hear from some of the Perceptive team today as we go through some of these case studies. You know, when we talk about Microsoft 365, there are about 1,000 different ways you could talk about all of these different applications, and the way that we've chosen to do it today is that we are going to pull some real live examples of customers and companies that we've worked with here in the past 6 to 12 months, problems and issues that they had, and how we were able to help them sort of guide them through this Microsoft 365 environment to create some unbelievable solutions. And so that's kind of how we're going to handle sort of the agenda and kind of how we're going to go through some of the products here on the 365 suite. As Mary said, we would love to have a bunch of questions, and so if you have any questions, just shoot it in the chat, and then Mary will interrupt us, and we can answer those questions. And if the questions do get a little bit more detailed, we're just going to push those off to the end, and we'll have a big question and answer session at the end. So we'll open that up to kind of everybody. So I'd like to dive into our first case study here, which was a company that does affordable housing. They do amazing work in our communities. They're providing affordable housing for lower income folks and families. They ended up with properties across 4 different states. They had a lot of different employees. They had a lot of different turnover. And as this organization developed, they started to see a real problem with documents that were scattered all over the place. They were having a very difficult time organizing those documents, keeping those documents relevant. Like I said, they had extremely high turnover, so they had a difficult time with people coming into the organization and learning all the methods and things that they had. And in general, they were starting to get a real feeling of just kind of an eroding of their trust throughout the organization. And so I'll have Frank dive in here now and talk a little bit about what we did to get them sort of squared around. Frank, you there?
Mute.
Sorry about that. I took Mary's opening to heart and had it on mute. So, thanks,
for
Mark.
listening, Frank.
You're welcome. Well, thanks, Mark. Yes, so we worked with this affordable housing organization, and we're currently designing and installing what was called an integrated modern workplace. So that's the buzzword that Microsoft uses now, right? A modern workplace. And essentially, that's kind of this umbrella term for Office 365 that includes Viva and Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive. And so this modern workplace is being re-architected. As Mark said, the documents were scattered. Their SharePoint was an old on-prem version of SharePoint. Some folks were using it, others weren't. So I'm sure some of you can relate to that. And they just wanted things to be freshened up. They want to get rid of the mess, if you will, and move on to kind of a really dialed in experience. So the first step in that is to come up with a strategy, right? Because what this slide is meant to indicate is essentially the way Microsoft has Teams set up out of the box is kind of, wild west. It's really open. People can just go in, create teams however they'd like, whenever they'd like. They can create channels, and Microsoft likes it that way, and they're supporting collaboration. And so there's good reason why they want it that way, but it also supports people being really engaged and invested in their platform, right? So as most of us here stateside and around the world as well, when we walked into the pandemic and IT had to respond, we kind of went to Teams, launched those. Before there was an executive sponsor for Teams, people were talking about it, right? But these governance items weren't in place. Who's on the steering committee? Who will make the governance decisions? Who's responsible for creating standardized teams and channels? So as we use this simple tool, it's called the RACI chart that talks about who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed for governance. Basically, no one is responsible for creating standardized teams, and so who's accountable? No one is, right? So the first step really was to work with the organization and kind of identify who's responsible for the governance, right? And who's responsible for creating standardized teams and channel names, and then what are they? What are those? So that's essentially the first step, right? And that would be our tip and recommendation, right? Come with a strategy first. Microsoft out of the gates with Teams is wide open, kind of entrepreneurial, kind of small organization, let everybody do everything. Oftentimes the response is let's lock it down, right? And IT kind of locks it down and doesn't allow anyone to create those except for a few people. And really the approach that we're suggesting here is let's have a balanced governance, right? A balanced governance where there's a qualified team that does it with a process, right, for approvals, for requesting and approving new teams and channels, and it just flows. It just flows. So that was kind of the first step for us. The second step is we looked at, bringing together this, using Microsoft Teams as the kind of the user experience or the centralized user interface, right? So it's a user-friendly experience. We brought in Viva, which is Viva Connections, which is really the SharePoint homepage. So your intranet site can be folded into the Teams experience on the left side rail. You'll see that at the very top is Viva Connections. So that's a SharePoint homepage. And then after that, you have your team sites and your communication, which is your chat and your meetings. So essentially bringing them all into a unified user experience. That was the second piece of the puzzle for us. The third step really is how do we enable people to get to Teams folders from the convenience of Windows Explorer? And really what's driving this is to foster adoption. We want their new experience to be really similar to what they had with a network drive. And with documents and files in the cloud, that's oftentimes difficult to do. But there's some tips and there's some tricks that you can do. And there's a couple of them. In SharePoint, as we look at Teams, well, kind of one of maybe the aha moments, if you haven't really dug under the covers in Microsoft Teams yet, if you go to Teams and the Files tab, and you can store all your files there, underneath that, that's really just a SharePoint site. So it's a document library SharePoint site. So, so essentially, if you go to SharePoint and kind of backwards connect and say, add this shortcut to OneDrive, it enables this view within Windows Explorer to then see your both your local documents that you're working on, but also all of the cloud documents. One word of caution, there's two options. You can add a shortcut. You can also sync to the documents. They're two very different options, and there's pluses and minuses to both. So you'll want to investigate those thoroughly. So like I said, one's syncing and one's a shortcut. So they both begin with S, and so it might be confusing a little bit, but we chose in this case to add a shortcut rather than to sync. So here's kind of the fourth tip. Really, it's about creating better adoption. When all is said and done, it's really about adoption for our end users, right? And so one of the approaches that we take with our partners is we basically talk about an approach to adoption using this normal kind of adoption curve. You kind of start at the left and you kind of pull that along, if you will. And it's much easier to start thinking about your organization and saying, okay, who are the innovators, right? Who are the folks who are super enthusiastic, and who are early adopters? And we start to list those people in different across the organization in these couple of buckets, right? So, and then we come up with a strategy on how do we roll this out first to those groups, to the early adopters and the innovators. Then followed by the early majority, right? And as this theme, as the technology starts to pick up pace, then we can start looking at the conservative folks, the late majority, and the laggards, the skeptics. Pretty soon everybody's talking about the tool, and I better get on board and give it a try, right? So if you do it in the reverse order, which sometimes happens, you're trying to convince the skeptics that they need to adopt this, and it's just like, pushing a rope rather than leading folks. So that was the other kind of tip here is to increase adoption. We like to think about our approaches using this kind of typical technology or product adoption curve, and talk to the right people at the right times. So those are the four things that we did, that we can highlight for you with that partner.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I don't want to overemphasize. We've been deploying technology projects for 25 years with partners, and one of the most disappointing things for us is the lack of adoption. And so I think those two slides you covered there, Frank, are wildly important. This Microsoft 365 environment has just incredible opportunity for everybody, but if you invest the time and you invest the money to get this product deployed, and you haven't given some thought to how to get everybody to adopt this when you're done, what you end up with is technology. It's expensive. Half the people are using it. Half the people are still clinging to the old system, and it just ends up sort of being a disaster. So I think giving some time and attention to strategy and how you're going to get your team to adopt is very, very much worth it. So the next case study we're going to talk about is an economic development organization. fairly big organization that was dealing with economic development, actually ended up with a lot of internal and external partners that they needed to communicate data with. And they were having a real difficult time communicating and getting this data back and forth to all these different entities in a timely manner. And file versioning just ended up being just kind of a mess. So we'll talk a little bit about what we did with these guys.
So this is for me. So what we're going to talk about here is that, I mean, how do you transition from a chaos to a very structured, organized set of data? So the backstory for this client has been that they have been kind of very nimble about adopting technology. Being a small company, they were able to kind of transition easily. But choosing a tool had been a challenge in the sense that initially when they started working with their partners, they were just emailing different documents to 5 different or 10 different partners. Then they adopted Dropbox. So with Dropbox, they kind of solved few of that emailing challenges, but still it wasn't fully functional for them. And then they hopped on to Office 365, and OneDrive came along with that. So they transitioned from everything from Dropbox to OneDrive. And what we are kind of trying to show here is that choose the right tool. So OneDrive is for me, for my stuff, my personal things. And SharePoint is for us, for them. So like if I want to share things, if I have some personal files that I'm working on that I want to share one-off files with other folks, OneDrive is pretty good for that. So you see on the left-hand side, I mean, everybody was having all their files in their OneDrives and sharing with each other. So it became a kind of a hot mess of sharing, and especially they got into challenges when somebody left the company. Now their OneDrive account kind of got away, and
Send the guy back. And send the guy
they didn't know who owned that file, and now what to do with that. So when we came in, we kind of said, okay, let's take a step back. Let's put everything in SharePoint. So start from the top. So a company site, a site for executives, and a separate site for board of directors. So their permissions and their needs are totally different. Then go down to the different departments, marketing, and not all the departments are listed out here, but they have like 5 or 7. And then go down to their different projects that you're working on. These are cross-functional teams working on a specific project, and they come from different departments. And then they had a research team, which is kind of collecting information and kind of sharing it across the company. And at times they are sharing that data and with their external partners. So with the right permission setup, you can easily kind of set up all these things together in SharePoint. And a very, very small subset of that research data, they are also sharing with public on their website. So all that is now happening in SharePoint. So it's all very manageable, very predictable, and transparent. Transparent in the sense it's transparent to the admins and the owners that who has access to what and who owns what.
And if I can just quickly interject, I am getting some background noise, so everyone has the ability to use the microphone. And if you're not speaking, if you could go ahead and make sure you're muted, that would be awesome. Excuse me.
Thanks, Gary. And the next thing, next challenge, I'm sure many of us might have seen this, versioning. When we create files, we tend to create versions. I'm working on a presentation, it's a draft, so it's a draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, and then finally I come up with a final version, so I call it my presentation final. And then somebody suggests some change, so I make it a final version 1, final version 2. I'm sure you might have seen that happen on your side too. But why do that? Let SharePoint take care of versioning. By default, when you put files in there, when you set up SharePoint sites, the default versioning is 500. So it will keep track of 500 versions. And if you don't like it, you can reduce it to 0, or you can go all the way up to 50,000. I don't know if you will really like to kind of keep that many versions, because every version is going to be taking some space. So, on the screenshot, you can see that just by 2 clicks, you can look at the version history of a file. And if you like, you can view that version, or if you need to, you can just kind of just restore the older versions. So just few clicks and you can work with the versioning. And another thing, there are some certain files that you may need to have a approval workflow set up in there. So if I make a file, my team needs to approve. So you can set up a check-in, check-out procedure on it. And it's just a few clicks of options that hey, any document in this library needs to be checked out for if somebody needs to make changes. So then others can still see the files, but they won't be able to make edits to it. And when I save it, a workflow can be set up to get few people notified, whoever needs to see it. And when they approve, my file gets checked in. Very neat feature and very productive.
Yeah, super cool. Oh,
Yep.
ready to go.
Yep. So Frank has been trying to connect with Jennifer, and Jennifer had a quick question, and that was, if you have Microsoft 365, do you pay for each additional item that you use? Can you give us a broad sense of how pricing is done?
I can quickly do that.
Okay.
I mean, when you purchase Office 365, if you get a license, you get a suite of products. I mean, you get Outlook, so email, calendar, and you get all the Office suite with it, and like PowerPoint, Word, Excel, and you get access to SharePoint, you get access to Power Automate, and few other things. If you go to Microsoft site, they will give you full details. But if you like, we can kind of help you out in kind of deciphering what all things come with it, your subscription. And they are fully functional subscriptions. And then you have a whole lot of other apps and features that you pay as you go.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. And then just a reminder that we do offer that follow-up where we can really delve in and help you with what you're currently using and how that's happening after the webinar. So I'll make sure that the email goes out to everybody and you can sign up for that opportunity as well.
Yep, really good questions. And I know the pricing for Microsoft, obviously the 365 platform, there's a lot to it. I wish the pricing was easier and easier to understand, but it is a little bit complex depending on what version of the product you're going to use and how you're going to use it. Keep in mind, for anybody on the call that's a nonprofit, nonprofits get a pretty sweet detail or a pretty sweet deal from Microsoft, as it's free in most cases. So we'll keep that in mind too. So going to move on to the next example we have. We have an engineering firm that really was driven by documents. They're constantly making widgets and different versions of these widgets. They're ending up with thousands and thousands of files and specs in these catalogs that they have. And they were becoming almost paralyzed because of all of these different files that they needed to access. They were using a typical folder file structure, which we're all very used to, where we have nested folders, and they were trying to find documents, these thousands of documents by clicking on a folder and a folder within a folder and a folder within a folder and a folder within a folder. And if you didn't know exactly what folders to click on, these documents basically didn't exist to you. And it was really becoming a problem for this organization. So we can talk a little bit about this, how we solved this with metadata.
Very good example. If you use metadata with SharePoint, you turn the very robust feature of search, which is already comes out of the box, you turn it into super search. What does that mean? Generally, if you do a search on a SharePoint site, it'll search the documents which are in there, by name. It'll search within the document, and it'll search the name of the folders and everything. And if you add some metadata fields, it'll search those fields also with you, with the same search. So you can see that how powerful it can be. So just one small example, small subset of documents that we put together for this client. There are a bunch of documents in this library. I'm just showing, kind of opened up 3 of them out there, and they just added a couple of fields. So product series, product model, and a few other fields. And every time a document gets added, they fill in these fields, and they are relevant fields to that particular set of documents. So whenever a search is done, so you can search this site, you can search a department site, or you can search a company site. So when you are searching at the company level, it is going to be searching all the sites of your tenant. So search is a very powerful feature in SharePoint, and so like Mark said, you cannot overcome that that hurdle of going folder through folder through folders. So just by knowing a few things about a document or anything inside a document, you'll be able to search those things on SharePoint.
Yep, and wildly important. And we're all used to using Google in our average everyday lives. We just go to Google or go to a search engine, and you throw in whatever search criteria you have, and you can literally find anything. And then we go to our work environments where we're working with nested folder structures, and unless you have memorized these pathways to get to these documents, the documents are largely just not accessible to you. So integrating and using, as you migrate from a regular server environment to an online cloud environment with SharePoint, and you're using flat file and metadata, you can turn your search capabilities into Google type really cool search for your organization. So next organization I want to talk about is a healthcare organization here in the Twin Cities, again doing just unbelievable work. And although they're a nonprofit and they're in healthcare, this is, I think, very common to what I see in a lot of businesses. They had, years ago they needed to figure out a way to organize all their donations online, and so they got an application to do that. And a couple years after that, they needed to figure out a way to figure out how to organize all their programs, and so they got a separate program to do that. And they kept adding in all these programs, which allowed them to continue to provide these amazing services to the clients that they had in the Twin Cities. The problem was they ended up with application sprawl. They had all of these disparate applications that were doing different things. They had repeated data in all these different applications, and they really needed sort of one source of truth for the organization. And so I think, Frank, do you want to talk about this?
You bet. Yeah, one of the things for clarification before we kind of dive into this case study, Jennifer asked the question about what's included in 365, right? A normal subscription. This case study is for kind of another application that's part of the 365 ecosystem, but it is a separate license, and that's called Microsoft Dynamics. You might have heard of that, maybe Microsoft CRM or Microsoft Dynamics CRM, but this is a separate license from just a standard, core subscription. But it is Microsoft's enterprise resource tool. It's an ERP tool. It's called Microsoft Dynamics. There's lots of modules for it, and there's actually a lightweight version of it as well, and that's called Business Central. So if you've heard of Business Central, that's kind of the small and medium-sized business version if you need all of these modules wrapped into one. But most people who start out with Dynamics, they essentially buy the sales module and the marketing module. They may include the service module as well, but essentially they start out with sales and marketing. And so as this organization, this nonprofit, was looking to consolidate and take, as Mark said, they've different programs were brought up and added to their offering to support people in the Twin Cities. They had separate systems, and so we know how that app sprawl goes. You buy a point solution for one, and then a point solution for the next one, and a point solution for the third, and then, but now as an organization, you take a step back and you say, okay, how can we grow the business? How can we move, increase donations, but also how do we reduce our overhead, right? Because as a nonprofit, one of the things they focus on is their overhead, right? Just like every other business. I mean, Charity Navigator, who ranks charities, they basically look at as a percentage, what's the percentage of your overhead compared to your overall expenses, right? How much of those donated dollars are going to actual program and serving people, and how much is spent on overhead. So it's a really big deal for nonprofits as well as typical for-profit businesses. So as this company took a step back and they say, how do we increase our growth and eliminate our overhead or reduce our overhead, they said, well, let's look to Office 365. They looked at Dynamics, and we kind of helped them as they figured out how to take this, what's typically a sales focused application, right, with accounts, contacts, leads, and opportunities. And there's a nonprofit accelerator that gets added on top of it, and it turns those entities, enables these entities of requests, awards, and disbursements. Now they can, they had this focus on how do we, I would call it a red focus, right? If folks can get to a red focus in your organization, which is what I call this relentless elimination of duplication, this kind of driving force of how do we eliminate duplication? How do we automate? How do we kind of get rid of any overlap? They had that kind of focus here, and they said, let's consolidate it all, bring it into Dynamics, and then we give one view of all of our customers across all three of our programs. We have all of our accounts there, all of our contacts, and then we can manage all of our requests, awards, and disbursements for all three programs in this one application. So that's the business case here.
Cool. Yeah, Dynamics is unbelievably powerful, and this is a longtime client of ours. I know that application for them is just a savior. Instead of having multiple applications that people are trying to work in, they're just much more efficient, having that one sort of source of truth. So the next section of companies that we want to talk about a little bit starts to get into some really cool stuff with Microsoft 365 in this environment, because automation is built right into the 365 platform. Most small businesses, most of the small businesses that we deal with on a day-to-day basis don't feel like they're large enough to really fully take advantage of automation, and they are. When it comes right down to it, any organization that has repetitive tasks that things do every week by the same people, any of those things can be automated, and there can be some unbelievable cost and time savings when this can be implemented. So next case study we're going to talk about a little bit is it's a cold storage facility. They're mid-sized. They've got a lot of things going on, and the company was built and sort of grew up around technology, and they just had a lot of manual processes that were happening every day, manual tasks that were happening by different people. One of the biggest things that they needed to do was print pick orders. They had to manually print and physically print these pick orders in order for any of the products in this facility to be moved around and transferred, and really for business to flow through the business. And so in times of COVID, when they weren't allowed to go to the office, that became a problem. In times of inclement weather where they had snowstorms and stuff, these people had to fight through these snowstorms to get to the office to manually print these documents so that this facility could continue to run. And so this is sort of part of the automation that was deployed there.
Right. And so really this is a case study of, unlike the last one, this one is kind of back to, hey, what's available right in the Office 365 kind of subscription that everybody is kind of entitled to, right? This is it's part of the core package. It's called Power Automate. and it can automate your tasks. It's available, as Mark said, to all of us, small, medium-sized businesses, and it was kind of right there available for them, and they didn't realize that it was really this tool, this powerful application that with a simple few programming things, they could kind of take care of this routine task and kind of automate it. So this is just a kind of it's really a techie slide, if you will, which shows you kind of underneath the hood what steps need to happen is part of a flow. Some of you might know it as a flow or a Power Automate task. So we were automating. All we're really doing here in all of these steps, you can see there's 10 steps or so. That the first thing we did is, in the first step, is we monitored a mailbox. And so as an order came in to a specific email address, you monitor that, look for the attachment, and then kind of validate that attachment, make sure it's in order, and then you send it to the right printer in the warehouse. And so it's really kind of these steps, these simple steps of, some of you might know it as, if this happens, then do that, right? That's a flow, right? If this happens, do that. So if you have those things going on that are kind of easily done by automation, you can think about, like, what is it logically that in my business flow that if this happens, always we do that, right? And if you've got those that you can identify, typically these can be just programmed up into Power Automate and automated. So this is that example. No more driving. They're up north. I kind of joke they're a cold storage facility. They're close to Canada, and they could probably just open the doors on days like we've had in the last couple of weeks. They don't even have to cool on the inside. It's like open the doors. But yeah, they had some challenges getting to the office during inclement weather, and now they don't have to do that anymore. So folks are really happy. The office staff improved just with this little kind of tool that was right there available to them in Office 365.
Yeah, this is really a critical thing. It's like I said, it's amazing how many companies that I talk to each week that just don't feel like they're big enough or worthy for automation. And the question is sort of, who's responsible for finding automation opportunities in an organization? And the answer that I always give is everybody, right? Everybody, you need to get your sort of your sights set on looking for tasks that are repeated either every day, every week, every month, and start to look at, is this something that we could potentially automate? There will be businesses, there will be small businesses that will sort of adopt this philosophy, and they are going to just really use this as a lever to rocket into the next phase of their business. And other companies are just not going to take advantage of it. And like Frank said, this is built into everybody's Office 365 platform and is available for everybody. So something that we just need to get all business owners sort of thinking about. Here's another example of, this is a really cool engineering firm. They set up big, large-scale events sort of all across the kind of the upper Midwest. And their process for getting these opportunities created a whole slew of paperwork and different tasks that need to be completed. And they were doing 3 to 7 of these opportunities every single day. And each one of these opportunities resulted in about an hour's worth of somebody going through, generating paperwork, figuring out what this opportunity looked like, taking all this data and putting it into their system. And they really needed to get their salespeople out of doing all this sort of nitty-gritty kind of work and out where they really needed to be, which was out selling. And so this is kind of the process that was laid out to help these guys.
So like you heard, the key is to automate. Find all those opportunities in the organization. That's what we keep talking to our kind of clients whenever we work with them, is that, hey, find those opportunities where somebody is doing some manual work in one system or across systems. They have one hand in one system and other hand in another system, just reading from one and typing into another. Find those opportunities and put automation in place. And the outcomes are going to be very tremendous. I mean, with automation, people learn to do things, but mistakes happen, and more important, timeliness. I mean, people have lots of things to do, and they will get to it when they get to it. But people might, on the other side, people might need it right away. So in this specific example, in this case study, their sales guys are working in Salesforce. Great tool, but it lacks some kind of document management capabilities for their specific needs. So what they said, okay, they started doing all this document management on the network share drives. And in one of the discovery calls with them, and we have been working with this client for quite a while, and they mentioned, hey, we have this kind of a situation. Is that something that can be done in SharePoint? So we looked at it and I said, hey, this is a perfect opportunity for automation. So what we set up is that we'll ingest all the opportunities. There are like tens of thousands of them, and many of them coming depending on the day of the week or month of the year. It could be anywhere from 10, 15, and many of them coming depending on the day of the week or month of the year. It could be anywhere from 10, 15, 20 coming in every day. So, I mean, that's all fine. But once the sales opportunities come in, they need to be executed. Their internal project team needs to work on them for the clients. So we set up a task to ingest all those sales opportunities in a SharePoint list. One of the project managers needs to go there when they decide that, hey, yeah, we need to start working on this particular opportunity and make it a project internally. So they just go click a button, takes them less than a minute. And within 2 minutes, they have a project site available to them. And project managers get notified. They say, hey, your site is ready. They take over and all the permissions are set up. All the folders are set up. And everything is kind of pre-done in a template site. So that gets replicated to the new project site. So, I mean, take the efficiencies they gained. They were spending about an hour for every project. And on a typical day, they were kind of averaging 3 to 7 opportunities getting converted to a project task. And for automation, they saved all that. I mean, overall, they would have been spending 3 to 7 hours a day collectively on a human resource side to kind of get this process going. And you will see, I mean, you will appreciate that the efficiency gain is priceless, and timeliness, perfect, on the dot. As soon as they click on the button, they have a project site available. So the key here is find those opportunities to automate any kind of manual steps that people might be doing in your organization.
Yep, and I think you bring up another really important thing here, which is the sort of the return on this investment. You know, for a long time, a lot of automation projects and technical projects like this have gone without, you know, being fully under the microscope from a return on investment perspective. And so this is another thing that we strongly recommend and help all of our client partners with is you need to have some feeling for what your return is going to be on this investment, both in money and time for your organization. And so the return on their investment for this particular project became very readily available because of all the savings they were saving right off the bat here. So so one of the last ones we want to talk about here is a marketing consulting firm. And this is something that we actually see a ton of right now. There seem to be like legacy applications that sort of live in all of the business environments that we deal with. Whether that's an Access database that was built by somebody years and years ago. These legacy applications exist, and businesses have been reluctant to migrate away from them because it's been extremely cost prohibitive to try and replicate it and get it to accurately replicate and then not spend just thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to do this. So there's a lot of the things that we talked about so far in this presentation today that the team at Perceptive would call low code types of engagements, where it's sort of built there. It's out of the box. You can pretty much make this thing work without a lot of development work. sometimes these legacy applications take some development, but the cool thing with that is that development is being done on the Office 365, the Microsoft 365 platform. So when the legacy application is done and developed, it integrates and plays really well with all of the other applications, Outlook, Excel, anything else that you would use to access the data from that legacy application kind of within that platform. So let's talk just a little bit about this project.
Thanks, Mark. So what you're looking at here is a screenshot of Microsoft Access. You probably at some point worked with an Microsoft Access database. They had implemented that work. Sometimes just over time, some of those systems are not able to keep up with the changing business needs. That's just a reality of software evolution, how organizations grow. And some legacy systems are not easy to replace. We work with customers who have legacy systems that they've been using for decades. They don't want to touch them. It works. Yes, it's not pretty. It may still be green screen and old school and all that, but they are okay with that. It works. Some applications are difficult to replace, and I would never suggest that they should rush to replace that. But on the other hand, some applications, specifically Microsoft Access based and Microsoft Excel based, those are easier to replace than most people would think. So every organization that we work with uses Excel. Some organizations have some very intricate interlinked Excel files with 18 different tabs and tabs referencing tabs and files referencing files. And I've seen, CFOs essentially run their business on Excel. It's very common. Why? Because they can control it. They can move the data. They pull it from system A and the payroll system and the project management system and the sales data and the forecast data. And Excel is oftentimes where all the magic happens. Which is all good. But with Microsoft Access and Excel, one of the limitations is these products were not designed for concurrent access. So if you have stored your Excel file or your Access file in a network drive, back when these products were invented and developed decades ago, they were meant for a single user. Yes, Microsoft has come a long ways in making them more shareable, etc. But these were not designed for a multi-user concurrent. Otherwise, people overwrite each other's changes. So what we did is we converted this Access database into 100% cloud-based, web browser-based system. And we've been doing so many of these. There are tools available to take some gigantic Excel and Access files and dump that data into a solid database like a Microsoft SQL Server or MySQL. I mean, these are some database products. Put those up in the Azure cloud with the Microsoft's cloud, and then just develop some user interfaces. And another advantage of doing that is, now you don't have to VPN into your network. You just go to a web browser, plug in your username, password. Sometimes maybe you want to do a second factor authentication, like, do the text message just to verify. Some people want to add another level of security. We can, those things are relatively easy now compared to, even 5 years ago. Some tips as you go through this process. Single sign-on is huge. One of the the most difficult things to manage sometimes is people having to remember 4 different passwords for 4 different applications. Try and use the login that they're already using for something else. These things are easy to do. If you want to talk more about these, we can give you some tips, and help you out, or and give you some guidance. And then the second bullet here, replacing your Excel and Access-based tools with SharePoint lists. So SharePoint lists are part of a standard O365 subscription, so you're not paying anything extra for that. So Power Apps, Power Automate, like Gurjesh mentioned, a lot of these tools are part of most Office 365 subscriptions. So keep that in mind. You can, develop some of these, replace some of these Excel and Access-based applications and run them in the Microsoft Cloud.
All right, so just a couple of things here to kind of just summarize some of the things we've talked about here today. Before we dive into any of these programs, like Frank mentioned earlier, a lot of these programs are built so you can sort of install Teams and you can just sort of set up Teams and start running with it. But without taking a step back first and really planning and having a strategy for the deployment of a lot of these products, you can end up with some version of data sprawl or some version like within Teams. We've seen organizations that have just set up tons of different teams and tons of different channels, and all of a sudden their efforts to make things more organized and more collaborative end up being less organized and much more confusing, and things are just end up getting all over the place. So it's always strategy before execution. I think the other thing before going into any of these projects that's very critical to do is you need to think a little bit about what your adoption strategy is going to be for this project, because if you haven't planned that out, if you haven't identified a few champions within the organization that are going to be really excited about this new technology and really going to take this to everybody else and really sort of drive the adoption of this thing through the organization, it's going to be fighting tooth and nail when you finally get the project developed and deployed. You may have 50% adoption within your team, and it's not going to work as well as it probably should. There are different things like versioning within the tool that allow for it allows for you to eliminate or nearly eliminate the duplication of data in pretty much every business network right now. It's estimated that 20 to 40% of the data that's within the network is duplicated someplace else. It's also important to use the right tool. We just see a lot of organizations, again, that have sort of adopted some of these 365 tools, and they're just not using them in the right way. If you're using OneDrive to share documents with others out of OneDrive, that's not a proper application for OneDrive, which should really be used for sort of personal information. You want to use SharePoint and Teams for documentation that needs to be shared with others, both inside and outside of the organization. And then I think one of the big things that we really want to start emphasizing with all businesses is the possibility for automation. I don't care how large or small your organization is, there are automation possibilities for your organization that really could help to drive you into the future. And it's really sort of just taking a step back and looking for and helping to see those automation examples. And then like Sharad was saying there, the last example that we had, there are just a ton of these legacy applications that exist in business environments that can now be customized and rewritten in the new modern tools and part of this new modern workplace that will allow for a complete replication of that legacy application and still allow it to integrate perfectly with all the other tools when we're sort of done. So I think that's sort of a summary of kind of what we've covered here today. So I don't think we have any additional questions. Frank, Gurjesh, Sharad, thanks so much for joining us today. You guys rock it with these applications, and I really appreciate everybody else taking an hour out of their day or evening to join us. So I hope everybody has a wonderful day.